He left his wife to protect his fortune, but karma made him pay in loneliness. Anh rồi bỏ vợ để bảo vệ tài sản, nhưng nghiệp khiến anh phải trả giá bằng cô đơn. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We have noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It is quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you heartfelt stories every week. Your support means everything to us. Let us keep this channel growing together. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. Let us go back to our main character. The clock ticked softly inside the penthouse kitchen, echoing through a space far too large for one man. Ethan Cole stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, staring at the untouched dinner across from him. He had cooked out of habit, not hunger. Across the table sat an empty plate, a ghostly reminder of the woman who once filled this room with laughter. Outside, New York's skyline shimmered through the glass walls, beautiful and cold like the life he had chosen. 3 years ago, he had signed the divorce papers with steady hands, convincing himself he was protecting her from his collapsing empire. His company had been under investigation. Rumors swirled, investors fled. He told her it was better this way, that she deserved stability, not scandal. But deep down, Ethan knew the truth. He was not saving her. He was saving his pride. Now, the empire had survived. The numbers in his bank account looked impressive again. But every night when he set 2 plates on the table out of habit, silence answered him back. His assistant once asked if he wanted to attend a charity gala that weekend. He had declined. The thought of smiling for cameras felt exhausting. He picked up the glass of wine she used to prefer, a dry red from Napa Valley. He remembered how Ava would swirl it gently before teasing. "You never drink it right, Ethan. You rush even your wine." He smiled faintly at the memory, but it faded just as quickly as it came. He had rushed everything: his work, his decisions, even the ending of his marriage. The phone buzzed against the marble counter, breaking the quiet. A name flashed across the screen: Nathaniel Gray, his longtime lawyer and oldest friend. Ethan answered with a sigh. "Tell me you are not calling with more bad news." Nathaniel's voice was calm but heavy. "Not bad news, just something you should know. Ava's architectural firm just won the bid for the Madison Harbor project." For a second, Ethan froze. "She did?" "Yeah," Nathaniel replied. "You might run into her. The board wants Cole Enterprises to handle the construction partnership." The line went silent for a moment. Ethan's heart gave a slow, unfamiliar thump. He had imagined this moment countless times, seeing her again, maybe in some neutral space, maybe years later, but the idea of standing in front of her as a business partner made his chest tighten. He had spent 3 years pretending to move on, but the truth was simpler. He had never stopped missing her. He walked to the window, staring down at the city that glittered like temptation. Every tower, every deal, every signature it had, all meant nothing without her beside him. The regret had crept in slowly, the way winter frost creeps along a window pane. Quiet, unstoppable. That night, for the first time in years, Ethan opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a small, worn envelope sealed with her handwriting. He had never opened it after the divorce. He was too afraid of what it might say. His fingers brushed the edges, trembling slightly. He thought about their last argument, the slammed door, the silence that followed. He placed the letter on the table, untouched once again. "Tomorrow," he told himself, "I will open it tomorrow." But deep down, he knew the truth. He had said the same thing yesterday, and the day before that. Outside, the city kept breathing, unaware of the man standing alone behind the glass, a man who had once chosen success over love, and now had both, yet felt poorer than ever. And somewhere across town, under the same winter sky, Ava Reed looked at the Madison Harbor blueprints, not knowing that fate was quietly drawing their lines together again. The next morning, Ethan's alarm buzzed at 6, slicing through the heavy silence. He had barely slept. The letter from Ava still sat unopened on his desk, mocking him from across the room. He got ready in silence, knotting his tie perfectly, though his hands trembled slightly. The elevator carried him down from the penthouse, glass doors reflecting a man who looked like he had everything together except peace. At Cole Enterprises, his team was already preparing the new partnership meeting. When His assistant mentioned that the representatives from Reed Architecture would be joining. Ethan's stomach tightened. He simply nodded and said, "Prepare the conference room." By 10 o'clock, the glass doors slid open. Ava Reed walked in, wearing a navy suit that matched her calm expression. Her hair was shorter now, more professional, less wild than before. But when her eyes met his, Ethan felt the air shift. 3 years of distance collapsed into one long breath. "Mr. Cole," she greeted softly, extending her hand. He took it, feeling the same warmth he had once thought he could forget. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Congratulations on the bid." She smiled politely, not cold, but guarded. "Thank you. I did not expect we would cross paths again." The meeting began, filled with blueprints and budget terms. Ava spoke with precision and confidence, explaining every structural detail. Ethan listened, but every word she said reminded him of late nights years ago, her sketching designs at their kitchen table, her coffee mug leaving faint circles on the paper. He used to tease her about those stains. She would laugh, saying, "Designs should breathe, Ethan, not live in sterile lines." When the meeting ended, she gathered her files. "Good to see you again," she said politely. "You too," he replied. "Maybe we could catch up." But before he finished, she interrupted gently. "I think the work will keep us both busy." Then she turned and left the room, her heels clicking against the marble like punctuation marks he could not erase. Ethan stood still long after she was gone. Nathaniel stepped in a minute later. "Well, that went professionally." Ethan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "She looked right through me, Nate, like I am just another meeting. That is what you wanted, remember? No attachments, no complications." Ethan looked at the city through the glass wall. "I thought I wanted peace. Turns out, peace without her feels like silence." That evening, Ethan skipped his usual dinner and walked aimlessly through Madison Harbor, the site they were both working on. The winter wind bit through his coat. Across the fenced construction area, he saw workers packing up, and among them, Ava, supervising one last survey. He almost turned away, but something inside him refused. He walked closer, stopping just short of the gate. She noticed him, hesitated, then stepped over. "You should not be here after hours," she said, her tone calm but tired. "I could say the same to you," Ethan answered quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. The city hum filled the space between them. Finally, he asked, "Are you happy?" Ava blinked, surprised by the question. "That is not really your concern anymore." "I know," he said, "but I still needed to ask." She looked away, her breath visible in the cold air. "I am at peace now. I build, I design, I work with people who respect me. That is enough." Ethan nodded slowly, the words cutting deeper than she knew. He wanted to apologize right there, to say he was wrong, that letting her go was the worst decision of his life. But pride and fear built a wall he could not break. As she turned to leave, he said softly, "You won the bid because you earned it. You always did." Ava paused but did not turn back. "Thank you," she said simply. He watched her disappear into the evening fog, her silhouette fading against the lights of the harbor. For the first time in years, Ethan realized regret did not roar, it whispered. It whispered every night he went home alone. Every morning he stared at the unopened letter, and every time he heard her name spoken in a tone that was no longer his to use. That night, he finally picked up the envelope again, tore the seal open, and unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The handwriting was soft and familiar. It said only 3 lines. "Ethan, if you ever learn to listen before you speak and feel before you run, then maybe we will find each other again, not as lovers, but as people who finally understood love." He sat there in silence, the city glowing beneath him, and for the first time since the divorce, Ethan did not feel anger or defense, only the weight of understanding. The following week arrived with deadlines and rain. Ethan buried himself in work, trying to quiet the echo of Ava's letter that lived in his chest. But no matter how many reports he signed or meetings he led, her handwriting haunted him, the part that said, "Feel before you run." By Friday, the Madison Harbor project required another on-site inspection. Ethan could have sent a team, but he decided to go himself. When he reached the site, the air was damp with the smell of concrete and sea salt. Ava was there, of course, wearing a hard hat and raincoat, giving instructions to a group of engineers. She turned and saw him. "You again," she said, half a sigh, half a question. He smiled faintly. "Just checking progress. Or memories?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan chuckled softly. "Maybe both." They stood there as the rain slowed into a drizzle. For the first time, the silence between them did not feel like punishment. It felt like space. He watched her bend over the blueprints, explaining the layout to her crew, confident and sure. The woman he once left behind had built something much stronger than the empire he was so afraid to lose. When the others walked off, Ethan stayed. "Ava," he began quietly, "I opened your letter." She froze, the sound of the waves filling the pause. He continued, "You said maybe one day we would find each other again, not as lovers, but as people who understand love. I do not know if I am there yet, but I am trying." Ava looked at him carefully. "Why now, Ethan?" "Because for 3 years, I convinced myself that work would erase what I did. It did not. It just buried it under numbers and noise." He exhaled, his voice lower now. "You were right. I never listened before I spoke. I never stayed long enough to understand." Her expression softened, though her eyes stayed steady. "Do you think an apology can fix everything?" she asked. "No," he said immediately. "It cannot. But it can start something honest." She studied him, the rain tapping lightly against her jacket. "You sound different." "I am different," he replied. "Or maybe I am finally the person you believed I could be." She smiled, then small, sad, but real. "I stopped waiting for you a long time ago," she said. "I know," he answered quietly. "But I never stopped waiting for myself." For a moment, they both laughed, the kind of laugh that holds history. Ava folded her arms. "If you really want to make things right, help us finish this project right. Madison Harbor is supposed to be a community space. We promised affordable housing. The investors want to cut that corner." Ethan nodded immediately. "Then we will not let them." Her eyes widened slightly. "You would go against your own board. I would go against anyone who thinks profit is worth more than people," he said firmly. "Consider it my first act of redemption." That evening, he called an emergency meeting at Cole Enterprises. The boardroom filled with sharp suits and skeptical faces. "We will keep the original housing plan," Ethan declared. "No changes." The CFO protested. "Ethan, that will cost us millions." He stood his ground. "Then it will cost us millions, but it will buy us integrity and a future I can live with." The room fell silent. For once, Ethan did not speak like a CEO defending numbers. He spoke like a man reclaiming his soul. Later, as he left the building, his phone buzzed. A message from Ava. "I heard about the board meeting. That was brave. Or maybe just finally honest." He typed back slowly. "Maybe both. I am not asking for another chance at us, Ava. I just want to live like the man you thought I could be." She replied after a minute. "Then keep doing that. The world needs more of that man." Ethan smiled at the screen, the city lights reflecting on the glass. He did not know where this path would end, whether forgiveness would come or fade into memory. But for the first time in years, he did not crave control. He craved peace. He slipped his phone into his pocket and looked toward the harbor, where cranes glowed under floodlights, and the future slowly took shape. A project not just built of steel and glass, but of redemption, choices, and the courage to care again. And as the rain began to fall once more, Ethan lifted his face toward the sky, letting it wash over him like a quiet promise kept. 2 weeks later, the Madison Harbor site buzzed with progress. The foundations were set, and cranes swung steadily above the waterfront skyline. Ethan walked across the gravel path with a hard hat on, nodding to the workers, greeting them by name. Something had changed in him. He no longer showed up to inspect. He showed up to understand. Ava noticed it too. She watched him from across the platform, arms folded, pretending to review blueprints. He crouched beside one of the younger engineers, listening patiently as the man explained a drainage issue. 3 years ago, Ethan would have cut him off, demanded a solution, and moved on. Now he was asking questions, genuinely listening, even thanking the man for his input. Later that afternoon, she approached him by the fence. "You are starting to sound like a human again," she teased. He laughed softly. "I am trying to remember how." "Keep at it," she said, handing him a clipboard. "The world could use more of that version of you." The winter wind swept through the harbor, carrying the smell of salt and cement. Ava's hair blew across her face, and instinctively, Ethan reached out and tucked it behind her ear. The gesture was brief, but electric familiar, dangerous, tender. She froze for half a second before stepping back, her voice steady but softer now. Old habits die hard, he nodded. So do old feelings. For a moment they stood there, neither daring to say more. Finally, Ava spoke. Ethan, I am not angry anymore. I stopped being angry when I realized anger was just another form of attachment. But forgiveness, that is different. He met her eyes. I do not expect forgiveness. Good, she said, because it is not something you ask for. It is something you earn. That night, Ethan stayed late at the office, reviewing the new housing plan for the harbor project. He could hear Nathaniel's voice echoing in his mind. You are risking too much, Ethan. Maybe he was, but for once the risk felt worth it. He took out the old photo frame that used to sit on his desk years ago, a picture of him and Ava from the early days, standing under scaffolding, helmets tilted, covered in dust and laughter. Back then, they had built everything together from nothing. He remembered her saying, "One day this company will be our story." And he had made it his story just without the hour. The next morning, Ethan called for a press briefing. In front of reporters and cameras, he announced that Cole Enterprises would personally fund the affordable housing units cut by the investors. It is time we build for people, not just for profit, he said firmly. It made headlines within hours. Some praised him, some mocked him, but he did not care. When Ava saw the broadcast, she stood frozen in her office, the television light flickering across her face. It was not just the gesture, it was the sincerity behind it. For years, she had wanted to hear him say those words, not to her, but to the world. That evening, she found him again at the site. He was alone by the pier, watching the cranes move against the golden sunset. You really did it, she said quietly. He turned, smiling faintly. You taught me how to build things that matter. I just took too long to learn. Ava stepped closer, her voice calm but warm. I did not do this, Ethan. You did. You finally built something without needing to own it. He looked at her, the air between them thick with years unsaid. Does that mean you forgive me? He asked carefully. She hesitated, eyes reflecting the fading light. Forgiveness is not a switch, Ethan. It is a door. You have knocked on it, and that is a start. They stood together in silence as the last rays of sun broke across the water. Ethan's chest felt lighter, not because he had been forgiven, but because he had finally stopped running from the man he used to be. Before leaving, Ava said softly, You know, the community center. We'll need a name. Any ideas? He smiled. Name it after the first thing we ever built together. She tilted her head. You mean the bridge project? He nodded. Yes, the harbor bridge. It held more than steel. It held us. Ava smiled faintly, then turned to go. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving Ethan alone under the darkening sky. He looked out over the harbor lights and whispered to himself, maybe this is what healing feels like. Not winning her back, but earning the right to stand beside her again. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with silence. It was no longer punishment. It was proof of growth. A month later, the Madison Harbor project neared completion. The waterfront was no longer a maze of steel and dust. Now it looked alive, families visiting the promenade, children laughing near the fountains, lights glowing across the glass panels that reflected the sky. Ethan walked through the site slowly, hands in his coat pockets, the sound of the waves blending with construction hums. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel like an outsider looking in. Ava was standing by the new community center, reviewing the final checklist with her team. When she saw him approach, she smiled, a real one this time, not guarded or polite, but simple and warm. Mr. Cole, she greeted, teasing. Back for another inspection? He laughed. Not today. Just wanted to see how the place looks before the opening ceremony. She handed him a folder. Then you might as well check the final approval forms. Old habits die hard. He took the folder, glancing at her with a grin. Maybe some habits are worth keeping. They walked together through the open courtyard. A bronze plaque was being mounted on the main wall, still covered with a white cloth. Ethan glanced at it. Is that for the donors? Ava shook her head. Not exactly. It is for the people who made this project what it is. He smiled. Then it is going to be a long list. She hesitated. Not that long. The air was cool and quiet, the harbor shimmering under the afternoon sun. Ethan stopped near the railing, looking out at the water. I never realized how much beauty I missed chasing what I thought mattered, he said softly. Ava leaned beside him, her tone gentle but firm. You cannot rewrite the past, Ethan, but you can rebuild what stands in front of you. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the horizon. I used to think rebuilding meant fixing the damage. Now I see it means accepting it. Ava turned to face him. Acceptance is the hardest blueprint. It has no straight lines. He smiled faintly. You always had the better designs. She laughed softly. Maybe because I never built to impress. I built to last. They stood there quietly until one of the workers called Ava over. Before she left, she said, You should be here for the opening next week. The board will. Want you to speak. He looked at her carefully. And what about you? I will be there, she said, but this is your redemption, not mine. He shook his head. No, Ava. This is ours. It started with both of us. The week passed quickly. When the grand opening arrived, the entire city turned up to celebrate. Reporters, city officials, families all gathered under the golden lights of the new harbor. Ethan stood backstage, adjusting his tie, feeling a nervousness he had not felt since his first business pitch. He spotted Ava in the crowd, talking with the volunteers, her laughter carrying softly through the noise. When the mayor finished his speech, he invited Ethan on stage. Ethan stepped forward, applause filling the air. He looked out at the sea of faces, then down at Ava. For once, he did not speak from a script. He spoke from the truth he had fought to learn. This project, he began, was supposed to be about development, about numbers, budgets, and deadlines. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. It became a reminder that building walls does not protect us. Building bridges does. The crowd grew quiet, every word echoing through the night. He continued, 3 years ago, I thought success meant being untouchable. I was wrong. Success means being human enough to change. He paused, glancing toward Ava. And to the person who taught me that, thank you for reminding me what home truly means. The audience erupted in applause, but Ava stood still, her eyes glistening. When the mayor pulled the white cloth from the bronze plaque, everyone gasped softly. It read, The Harbor Bridge Project, dedicated to second chances, and to those who choose to rebuild with love. Ava turned to Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. You named it after us. He smiled gently. No, Ava. I named it after what we became. The music swelled, cameras flashed, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, not a fairy tale, not a reunion, but something truer. After the ceremony, they walked along the pier together, the night calm and forgiving. Ethan said quietly, You once told me forgiveness is a door. Thank you for leaving it unlocked. Ava looked at him with a soft smile. Doors are meant to open when people learn how to knock. He nodded slowly, letting her words settle deep in his chest. As the harbor lights shimmered on the water, Ethan realized that love was never lost. It had simply been waiting for both of them to grow into it, and for the first time in years, he felt that he had finally come home. The night after the grand opening, Ethan found himself driving back to Madison Harbor long after the lights had dimmed. The city was quiet, the moon hanging low over the water. The new community center stood glowing softly against the dark, still carrying the laughter and applause from the ceremony hours earlier. He parked near the pier, stepped out into the cold air, and just stood there for a while, listening to the sound of the waves. It felt surreal. For the first time in years, he had nothing left to prove, no deal to close, no damage to hide. He had faced the world with honesty, and somehow, the world had not fallen apart. Instead, it had started to open up. Ava's words from earlier replayed in his mind. Doors are meant to open when people learn how to knock. He smiled faintly, whispering into the wind. I am learning, Ava. I finally am. As he walked closer to the boardwalk, he saw a small group of volunteers cleaning up after the event. Ava was among them, tying trash bags, laughing with a young intern. When she spotted Ethan, her laughter softened into surprise. Could not stay away, could you? He shrugged. Maybe I wanted to see what peace looks like after the crowd leaves. She handed him a broom. Then help us clean it. He laughed quietly, but took it. You really will never let me just stand around, will you? Not when there is work left to do, she replied. They swept the wooden deck together under the soft glow of the harbor lamps. It felt ordinary, yet perfect. Every movement carried the unspoken comfort of two people who had finally stopped trying to win and simply started to be. When they finished, Ava leaned against the railing, looking out over the water. You know, she said, the last time we stood here together, everything between us was ending. Ethan nodded slowly. And now? She smiled. Now, everything feels beginning again. Not the same, not as before, but new. He looked at her, his voice low but sincere. I never thought I would deserve another beginning. Ava turned toward him. Deserving has nothing to do with it, Ethan. Growth does. They stood side by side, quiet for a long moment, the ocean reflecting the lights around them like a mirror of forgiveness. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I am not asking for the past back. I just want a future where we can both breathe easy, even if it is not together. Ava's expression softened. That is exactly what I want too. He looked down at her hands resting on the railing. For a moment, he almost reached out, but instead, he said softly, if we ever find our way back to each other, I hope it is because we walked there, not because we looked back. She nodded. Then let us keep walking forward, one honest step at a time. They stayed there until the harbor lights dimmed and dawn began to brush the sky with pale gold. When they finally turned to leave, the streets were still and empty, but something in Ethan's heart had shifted. The ache of regret had not disappeared. It had transformed. It was no longer a wound, it was a reminder. A quiet voice saying, you learned, you changed, you loved, and you tried again. Later that morning, Ethan drove home, sunlight breaking through the windshield. He passed by a bakery where a family was setting up for the day, children chasing each other on the sidewalk. He smiled, thinking about the life he once had and the kind of man he could still become. At a red light, his phone buzzed. A message from Ava. Next week, the center opens its after-school program. Come see what you helped build. He replied, would not miss it for the world. When the light turned green, he drove on, the city waking up around him. And for the first time, he felt it the calm satisfaction of knowing that redemption was not a destination. It was a daily choice. The harbor faded in the distance, but the feeling stayed steady, forgiving, and alive. It was the beginning of something real, something earned. The deepest secrets are about to change everything. Subscribe now to catch the dramatic twist that is coming in the next chapter. The following week, the after-school program at Madison Harbor officially opened. Children filled the new community center with noise and color, laughter echoing through the glass halls. Ethan stood by the entrance, watching volunteers hand out snacks and notebooks. It was chaotic but beautiful life returning to a place that had once been just blueprints and steel. Ava approached, holding a clipboard and a half smile. I see you showed up, she said. Of course I did, he replied. I wanted to see what hope looks like when it is finished. She laughed softly. Hope is never finished, Ethan. It just keeps growing. He nodded, looking around the room. You built something incredible. We built it, she corrected gently. A little boy ran up to Ava, tugging at her sleeve. Miss Ava, can I show him my drawing? She smiled. Go ahead. The boy handed Ethan a crayon sketch, two figures standing under a bridge with a sun above them. This is you and her, he said proudly. You built the bridge, right? Ethan looked at the drawing, his throat tightening. Yes, he said softly. We built it together. The boy grinned and ran off again, leaving Ethan holding the paper like it was something sacred. Ava watched him quietly. You okay? He nodded, smiling faintly. That little kid just summed up 3 years of my life better than I ever could. Kids have a way of seeing the truth before we do, she said. They walked outside to the balcony overlooking the harbor. The late afternoon light shimmered off the water, painting everything gold. Ethan turned to her. You know, I used to think redemption was about undoing the damage. Now I think it is about learning to live with it and still choosing kindness. Ava's eyes softened. Maybe that is what love really is. choosing kindness after all the storms. A gentle breeze moved between them, carrying the faint sounds of laughter from inside. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence between them no longer felt fragile, it felt full. Ava finally said, "I do not know where we go from here, Ethan, but I know we are not lost anymore." He nodded. "That is enough for me." She reached out and touched his arm, brief but steady. "Then keep showing up. That is how healing works." He smiled. "You know, I think I finally understand what that bridge really meant." Ava looked curious. "What does it mean to you now?" He glanced at the horizon. "It means connection between who we were and who we are still becoming." The sun dipped lower, the sky turning amber. They stood side by side, both quiet, both changed, both finally at peace with what had been. The bridge they built was no longer just concrete and design, it was something unseen, something earned. And as the lights of the harbor flickered on one by one, Ethan whispered under his breath, "Some endings are just beginnings in disguise." Days passed quietly after the program opened, and the community center became a second home to many. Ethan often stopped by after work, not to supervise, but simply to help. He read stories to the children, fixed a broken bench, carried boxes for the volunteers. It was the kind of work that never made headlines, but healed something inside him piece by piece. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the harbor, Ava found him sitting on the steps outside, surrounded by leftover art supplies. He was carefully framing the drawing the little boy had made, the one with the two figures under the bridge. When she approached, he smiled softly. "I think this belongs on the wall inside." Ava sat beside him. "You are serious about that?" "Completely," he said. "It is not just a drawing. It is a reminder of what we built for them and for us." They carried the frame inside together, hanging it on the main hallway wall between the classrooms. The laughter of children echoed down the corridor, and for a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. Ava looked at the picture, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know, I used to wonder if forgiveness would ever find us." Ethan replied quietly. "Maybe forgiveness was never supposed to find us. Maybe we had to build it ourselves." She turned toward him, eyes reflecting the soft light. "You have changed, Ethan. Not just the way you talk, but the way you see." He nodded. "You changed me. Or maybe you reminded me who I was before I lost it all." They walked toward the balcony, where the evening air felt cool and calm. Ava leaned against the railing. "So, what now? You have rebuilt your company, repaired your reputation, and apparently discovered compassion. What comes next?" Ethan smiled. "Next, I keep showing up. I keep choosing better, and maybe I keep finding reasons to come back here." She gave him a teasing look. "You mean finding excuses to see me?" He chuckled. "Maybe that too." The lights across the harbor began to shimmer as twilight deepened. For a moment, Ethan watched the reflection of the bridge glowing faintly on the water. He said, "When I first built bridges, I thought it was about connecting places. Now I see it is about connecting hearts." Ava looked at him for a long second, then said softly, "Maybe that is what love always was, a bridge that takes two people to build and two people to keep standing." He nodded, his chest tightening with something quiet but certain. No grand confession, no dramatic reunion, just two people finally standing on solid ground again. The mistakes were still there, written in the past, but they no longer defined the present. Ava broke the silence, her tone light but sincere. "I do not know what tomorrow will look like, Ethan." He smiled. "Then let us just build it like we did this one brick, one truth, one act of kindness at a time." And as night settled over Madison Harbor, the lights from the bridge cast a soft glow across their faces. They were no longer two broken people. Trying to rewrite history, they were two healed souls quietly beginning a new one. Spring arrived slowly over Madison Harbor, softening the air and painting the waterfront in gold and green. The once empty site was now alive, families picnicking by the water, music drifting from the open plaza, children chasing each other around the fountain. Ethan had insisted they keep. He walked through the center that afternoon, greeting familiar faces. Each smile he received felt like a quiet reward, proof that redemption was no longer just a word, it was a life he was finally living. Inside the main hallway, he stopped by the framed drawing once more. It had become a favorite spot for visitors, a simple reminder of how far everything had come. He adjusted the corner of the frame and stepped back, noticing a small plaque mounted below it. It read, "Built not for perfection, but for second chances." He smiled softly. Ava must have added that. It sounded exactly like her. He found her later in the garden behind the community center, kneeling to plant new flowers near the walkway. She looked up and said, "You are late." Again. He laughed. "I brought coffee as peace offering." She took the cup and nodded approvingly. "You are learning." "I had a good teacher," he replied. They sat together on the stone bench, the sound of the harbor surrounding them. For a long while, they did not need words. The silence between them had transformed from distance into comfort. Ethan finally said, "Do you ever think about how it all started? How we almost lost everything just to find what mattered?" Ava smiled. "Sometimes losing everything is how you find the ground to build on again." He looked at her with a mix of admiration and peace. "You were always the foundation I kept trying to build on the wrong way. I just had to learn how to stand beside it instead of on top of it." Ava chuckled softly. "You and your metaphors. Maybe you really were meant to build bridges after all." "Maybe," he said. "This time, I am making sure they last." The wind picked up slightly, carrying the sound of distant laughter from the children's program inside. Ethan glanced toward the horizon where the bridge shimmered under the sunlight. "Do you think we will ever stop being a story about regret?" he asked quietly. Ava shook her head. "No, but maybe we can become a story about grace instead." He took a slow breath, letting her words settle like an anchor. "Grace," he repeated, almost to himself. "I like that." Then, with a gentle smile, she said, "Come on, Ethan. There is still work to do. The next phase starts next month." He rose and extended a hand to help her up. "Then, let us keep building, Ava. One project, one promise, one heartbeat at a time." As they walked back toward the center, the sun slipped behind the skyline, and the first lights flickered on across the harbor. In that golden twilight, their shadows stretched across the ground, not as two separate lines, but as one shared path. Ethan glanced at her, his voice low and certain. "Maybe this is what love looks like when it finally grows up." Ava smiled, linking her arm through his as they disappeared into the warm light of the center. For once, there was no grand ending, no dramatic closure, just peace, purpose, and the quiet joy of two hearts that had learned how to rebuild together. Thank you for joining us for this cinematic adventure. If you want more untold stories of billionaire love and redemption, please subscribe and choose your next true heart journey on your screen now.